In this video, I will be describing the steps that I went through to achieve this magical forest themed painting. Thanks for joining me to make this painting, and I hope you enjoy this tutorial. These are the materials you will need: phthalo blue, black, and white paints. These are liquid body acrylics, and I place them on my palette, in this case a paper plate as such, a cup of water, and a paper towel or rag. Having a set of brushes that have a bit of variety in size and shape will work great. I like to have a large flat brush, a medium round brush, a medium square brush, and a small detail brush. The size of your canvas will determine what size brushes you use, but my canvas is a 16 by 20 inch. I am going to start this painting by creating the background using my largest brush. I'm going to rely on the paints being blended on the canvas instead of pre-mixing colors on my palette. I will start by laying down some blobs of white paint in the center area of the canvas, where I want it to be the lightest, and I want to place down enough paint that it will spread across the canvas with ease. Once I have enough white in the middle area, I will grab some of my blue and place some small blobs of blue around the white in a large oval shape, and then I will start to blend the blue and the white together to create a darker blue around the outside and a lighter blue as I work toward the middle. I start by focusing on the area I place the blue down to create a large circle of it, and then I will move inward to blend with all of that white that I had placed down first. I try to maintain the circular or oval-like shape of the background by doing long curved brush strokes. If I find that the paint isn't spreading into all areas of the canvas, often presenting itself as a speckly texture, I can put more paint down, but often I like to add a little bit of water to my brush to help thin the paint so it will blend and spread more easily. As I continue to blend and build up the background, I can adjust the level of blue or white as I see fit, so I will dip my brush into the blue if I would like to add more and simply integrate it into the existing paint. I try to adjust and work on the background while the paint is still wet so everything blends together with ease. The more I brush over an area, the smoother the blend will be. Once I've created the center area of my background, I will begin to work toward the edges of the canvas. I start by adding more blue on the outer area of what is already on the canvas to create the effect of the background going from light to dark from the center of the painting outward. Sometimes when you add more paint, you will create an intense area of color that might give you some trouble to blend it in. In this example here, I don't want this blue to creep toward the middle of my painting, so to blend it out, I will wash my brush, apply a small amount of white to it, and focus my brush stroke on the edge of this harsher blue area. I will run the brush back and forth and then move outward to push that blue away from the middle of the painting toward the area I am aiming to keep a darker blue. The last step of this background is to darken the corners. I will start by adding a very small dot of black to each corner, and then my goal is to blend the black into the blue, creating some dark blues in between and a smooth blend. You only need a very small amount of black, as it is a very pigmented color and can take over very quickly. So, to blend the black into the blue, I will wash my paintbrush and apply blue paint to it. I will start by brushing over that small dot of black paint, automatically mixing the blue on the brush with the black on the canvas to create a dark blue, and I will work toward the rest of my background. Before this dark blue meets up with my brighter blue, I will wash my paintbrush again and apply more blue paint between these two areas to blend them together. Another way to do this is to start with a clean brush and the blue paint and fill in the remaining white space, then carefully go over the black dot and blending it into the blue, allowing it to take over the corner and blend with the freshly added blue paint. You can use that blending trick I showed earlier if you run into any problems using the blue instead of white. The background is all done. Now to create the landscape. I'm going to start by creating my horizon line, which I'm going to place slightly lower than halfway up the canvas. I like to make one of the sections larger so it isn't perfectly divided in half, and I'm going to use a bit of blue paint to carefully draw a line as straight as I can across my painting with my medium square brush. No worries if it isn't straight, as it will disappear later on, but it's a nice guide to help me start my painting so I know where the top and the bottom are going to be. I am going to create the effect of some greenery in the background. To make the greenery, I'm going to mix up a light blue by combining white with a bit of blue and a spot of black to tone down the brightness. Using the corner of my medium square brush, I will use a tapping motion to create a spotty texture that resembles lots of leaves on leafy plants. I am going to create this all along the horizon line, making sure that the height of this area varies so it looks like the leafy plants are all different heights and sizes. Using the background as a guide, I mix up a bit of a darker blue by adding more blue and a spot of black into my previous mixture to add the same texture to the edges where the background is darker along the horizon line, just so the lightness stays in the middle and the darkness remains toward the outside of the painting. Using my medium square brush and a bit of white paint, I'm going to map out the pathway through the forest. I want this pathway to be very narrow at the horizon line and get larger as it gets closer to the bottom of the painting to create the illusion of depth. I also want my pathway to wind through the forest, so I will make it curvy as well. I start with a single line and then continually add more width toward the bottom. I am only using white paint on my brush here, but my background is still wet as I add this in, so it's blending with the background colors. I prefer this because I don't want my path to be one solid color anyway, and if your path ends up being too large at this point, it can be edited later on. I'm going to begin building up the leaves in the background trees using the same technique I used for the other greenery. I will use the corner of the brush and tap it down gently to get a fluffy spotty texture, and I'm using my largest brush this time. I'm just going to use the same blue I had mixed up from the previous greenery, and I press quite gently as I tap the brush against the canvas, and I'm focusing this texture around the edges of the top half of my painting, letting a bit of it overlap onto the light center area. I don't need to cover the entire background with this texture. I leave gaps between the taps and the texture that I'm creating to let some of the background peek through. I will mix up a darker blue by adding more blue and a spot of black to my previously mixed up color to concentrate this around the dark corners of the top half of the painting to leave the darkness around the edges. I will let some of this color creep onto the previous one just a bit so that they merge together and don't stay completely separate. I am going to create some tree trunks next. I'm going to use my medium square brush, and I like this brush because I can get long, thin lines as I'm doing on this scrap piece of paper. I like to use my medium square brush over my smaller detail brush because I can use the brush vertically and get much longer, more consistent lines as my medium square brush holds more paint than a small detail brush would. I'm going to mix more white into the previous color I had mixed up to lighten it for this first set of trees. Once my brush is covered in paint, I will scrape the extra paint out of the bristles by running the brush against the palette a couple of times on each side. I am going to create a series of lines as tree trunks that start on the horizon line and go up to the top of my canvas. Except for the tree trunks I'm painting in the middle of my canvas, I will keep those a bit shorter and keep them within the light center area of the background. To create tree branches, I think about the letter Y. I try to make them flow out of the tree trunk and not make them too straight like an elementary alphabet letter Y. I will add a longer branch emerging from the tree trunk, and then I will continue to add more branches coming off of branches, always thinking about the letter Y. I don't want to overdo it with these trees since they are going to be in the distance, so just a few branches on each trunk will do. I like to continue to use my medium square brush for these, but I've found some folks like to switch to a smaller detail brush for this part of painting trees. Once that first round of trees is complete, I will mix more blue and a spot of black into my previously mixed color and do some more trees. These darker trees will overlap the others, making the first round appear further away. I mostly focus on allowing the branches of this second set of trees to overlap the first ones, and I will place the trunks in different spots so that I don't end up totally erasing one of the lighter trees that I had done before. I am going to use my large flat brush to add leaves to my trees. I'm going to use the same blue that is already mixed on my palette from the second set of trees that I just added. I will pick up my paint by gently squishing the brush straight down into the paint. This will fluff up and separate the bristles, so when I gently tap the end of the brush onto my canvas, I get a bunch of small dots rather than a big blob. I will continually tap the brush against the canvas to create these leaves, and when I add more paint to my brush or if my bristles start to come back together, I will gently squish the brush onto my paint again. I don't focus on adding the leaves to the branches specifically when I do this. I tap the brush on and around and in between the branches. This stops your leaves from looking too bunched together and allows your tree to look more airy and fluffy and full. I want to add a few leaves to the branches on the trees that are overlapping the center area of the painting. Since these are the first set of trees that I painted and they were a lighter blue, I will add a little bit of white into my previously made color to lighten it up a bit, and then add a few taps of the brush onto these branches as well. I'm going to build up the greenery on the forest floor, but only about halfway down the bottom section, as I want to add some more trees into the middle ground of this painting before I finish the rest of the forest floor. I'm going to use my large flat brush and dab it against the canvas to create a fluffy texture. I'm going to start by mixing a bit more white into the blue that's already mixed up on my palette to make it lighter, and I will start to create the texture with the dabbing motion near the top of the pathway, and then work away from that area. I'm going to add some more blue to the previously mixed color to darken it a bit as I go, to follow how the background goes from light to dark as I continue to build this area up, and I will do it again to darken it even more as I reach the middle area of the bottom half of the painting, again just following how the background goes from light to dark. I am going to add some trees into the middle ground. Using my medium flat brush, I will mix more blue and a bit more black into my previously mixed color to make it a dark navy blue color. Adding just a tiny dot of white to make it a little bit lighter. This will be the darkest color I've added yet, but I don't want it to be too dark so that my black silhouette really pops later. I am going to place a few trees that are planted within the fluffy greenery of the forest floor texture that I've just added. I want these trees to be planted at different distances, so I will be sure they land at different heights within this area. The lower on the canvas the tree is, the closer it appears. I'm going to make these trees the same way that I had done so earlier, except I will make the trunks even thicker so that they appear closer and create the illusion of depth. When I draw my line for the tree trunk, I will go back and slowly build up thickness toward the base of the trunk, creating a tapered line that is thin at the top and slowly gets thicker toward the bottom. I will also add a tree that has a thinner trunk and branches, and I'm going to keep it shorter as it's in front of the lighter area of the background. It will still appear closer as it overlaps the things in the background. I want to keep that glow in the painting and I don't want to cover it up too much. I will add more branches, thinking about the letter Y in the exact same fashion as the previously painted trees. This time, my first couple of branches on these thicker trunked trees reach out quite far, and I will also add more thickness to them as they connect to the thicker part of the trunk to make it a more natural looking connection between the two, and then I will go ahead and add branches coming off of branches coming off of branches. I am going to use my large flat brush to create leaves on these dark blue trees. I will use the same paint color that I already have mixed up on my palette, the same that I just used to paint these trees. I will pick up my paint by squishing the brush straight down into the palette to fluff the brush and separate the bristles. I tap the brush straight down onto the canvas very gently, which leaves behind lots of small dots that will make a leafy detail. I add this not only on the branches, but around them and in between them to make the tree appear fuller, but also still airy. Next, I'm going to use my medium square brush to mix up a light blue with white and a bit of blue. I'm going to use this to integrate the bottoms of those tree trunks into the forest floor. I'm going to use the corner of the brush and repeat that same tapping technique I've used before, and I will tap along the bottoms of the tree trunks, and I try to do this in a zigzag or sort of random fashion to avoid creating a straight line of taps. My background is still wet, so this paint blends in a bit as I add it, but if your background is dry, you can use a combination of the light blue, blue, and dark blues that you might have on your palette to get it all to blend together nicely. I am going to start adding detail and carving out the pathway. I'm just picking up a bit of white paint on my dirty medium square brush. You can also wash the brush and use a light blue color for this as well. I am just redefining the path and making it lighter. My brush strokes are going to follow the path or go with the flow of the path to create the illusion of depth and direction. I am mixing some of my light blue with my dark blue to get a medium blue color that matches more closely to what is on the canvas, and I'm going to tap the corner of the brush down to carefully add the leafy texture over some of the edges of the path. I'm going to spend some time adding some highlights and shadows into the greenery on the forest floor. I will use a very light blue to add the tapping texture to the tops of the greenery, and I will use a darker blue, mixing more blue and a bit of black into some of my previously made colors for the bottoms of the greenery. I try to figure out where the tops and bottoms of the greenery are by thinking about the height of things related to the pathway, and also by following the texture that is already on the canvas. If it feels higher than the path, I will add some lighter blues as highlights, and if it's ground level with the path, I will add some shadows. I added my highlights with the lighter blue first, which also helps me see more clearly where I should add the shadows, which is underneath the highlighted areas. I try not to add my highlight and shadow directly next to each other all the time by not completely covering the background layers of paint as I do this. To finish up this second layer, I will use my large flat brush and mix a bit more dark blue paint by adding some more blue into my previously made dark blue color on my palette. And then I'm going to fill in the section of the forest floor that is not done yet by repeatedly squishing the brush against the canvas. I will allow this section to slightly overlap what is already on the painting, and I'm going to be careful around my path, but I will also let this texture slightly overlap the edges of that pathway as well. Now for what is possibly the easiest step of this painting. I'm going to create a border around the entire thing with black paint and my large flat brush. I try not to make this border too thick so that I don't cover up too much of my painting. On my 16 by 20 inch canvas, this border was around an inch thick all the way around, except for where the path is going off of the bottom of the canvas. I also added a bit more in the corners to round them out. To integrate this border into the rest of the painting, I want to make it look like it is a silhouette of trees and leaves and shrubs framing the painting. I will use my large flat brush and pick up my paint by squishing the brush straight down into the paint to separate the bristles and fluff up the brush, and then I will go around the border gently tapping the brush along that harsh edge of that black paint to make it have a leafy texture. I try to have little bits of this creep into the painting a bit more than others so it doesn't always stay too close to that border and appears more natural looking. I also make sure that any of the harsh edges created by that border I painted are gone as I add this texture. I will add some of this leafy texture over the area where the path goes off the bottom of the painting, but I'm trying to preserve the path in that area so the black silhouette is smaller as it overlaps the path. Now that the border is done, I'm going to add in my final tree. I'm going to use my large flat brush and black paint to make the trunk of the tree, but this could also be done with a medium flat brush as well. I like to map out the shape of my tree by pretending to draw it a few times before I actually add the first line that goes from the bottom of the painting all the way to the top. I decided to keep it to the right of the path so that it wouldn't cover my pathway up. Now that that first line is on there, I'm going to slowly add more width to this tree trunk toward the bottom to create a tapered line that is thinner at the top and gradually gets thicker toward the bottom. I don't add any more width to the top half of this line, so as I do this, I start slowly retracing my first line about halfway down and build the most width at the base. Now that the largest part of the tree is done, I will switch to using my medium square brush. I want this tree to look really gnarly and whimsical, so I'm going to add some bumps along the tree trunk to make it look like it's old and wise. When I start to add branches to this tree, I'm still thinking about the letter Y, but the first few branches are going to reach to the edges of the canvas. So this first branch goes off to the right side, the next goes all the way to the left, and then one all the way to the top, and a few others that go into the border around the edge. As I continue to add branches, I will let them cross over each other to make the tree look more full and natural. I am not trying to make straight lines as I do this either, which also makes the tree look more natural. As I continue to add even more branches, I try not to let the branches get too short too quickly. I think about adding branches from long to medium to short. My first branches were nice and long and reached really far, and then the next set will be a bit shorter as they come off of the previously added branches, and then using my small detail brush, I continue to add branches coming off of branches, allowing the lines to get shorter and shorter to build up detail. I don't worry about my branches being absolutely perfect since I want this tree to have some bumps and lumps throughout it, but if there is a branch that gets really out of control, I tend to leave it alone and rely on my leaves to camouflage it a bit. Now I'm going to add the leaves to my final tree using black paint and my large flat brush, using the same technique as the previous leaves. Again, I am adding the leaves on and around the branches to make the tree appear full but also airy. I am trying to make sure that the border at the top gets integrated into the tree so that they merge together, but I'm also trying to avoid completely covering the background behind all of these leaves so it's still visible in the finished painting. I am slowly building up these leaves to avoid adding too many. I'm going to use my hair dryer to make sure everything is nice and dry to add on the final touches. Until now, it didn't matter if the painting was wet as I continued to add things to it, but I want these last details to not get mixed in with other paint, so nice and dry it has to be. I'm going to use my small detail brush and a light blue color to make the path stand out a bit more. I am not aiming to completely cover the path in this light blue, rather I'm aiming to add streaks of this color. If I've added too much or I want these streaks to blend in just a bit, I will dip into a medium blue color on my palette and add that in as well. My brush strokes are going to follow the shape as the path as I work on this section. Right here is where I felt that my light blue streaks needed to blend in a bit more with the previous layers of paint so the light blue wouldn't overwhelm the path, and so that it also has some texture. I mix up a bit of medium blue by mixing a small amount of my dark blue and blue paint into the light blue color. I can go back and forth between the light blue color and the medium blue color, adding streaks onto the path until I'm happy with the texture. I'm going to finish up the forest floor greenery by adding some more highlights and shadows, using a light blue color for the highlights and a dark blue color for the shadows. Light blue is white mixed with a bit of blue, and my dark blue is made by mixing blue, a little bit of black, and a little tiny bit of white. I'm using my medium square brush here and the same tapping technique that uses the corner of the brush, and I gently tap it down repeatedly. I'm not aiming to completely cover what is already there, so my taps are sort of sprinkled on top of the layers of paint that are already on the canvas. I've already figured out where I want the tops of the greenery to be and the shadows from before, so I will continue to follow that, but I'm also figuring out where the highlights and shadows need to go on the lower portion of the forest floor that I haven't added these details to yet. In the section I am about to add paint to, there is a lot of medium and dark blue added for the greenery on the forest floor. By adding some light blue, my highlight color, over part of this section, it creates the illusion that there is a top to some of this greenery that is catching the light. I'm going to add some texture to this tree trunk to make it look like some of the light coming through the forest is catching on the bark of the tree. I will use my small detail brush and a medium blue color on my palette and add streaks that follow the tree trunk, and I'm keeping them to the left side of the tree, which is closest to the light middle of the painting. I'm doing a similar thing that I did with the path, where if I want some of these streaks to blend in a bit, I will use a small amount of black to blend them in, and can add more medium blue as needed until my desired texture is achieved. I'm going to go over the painting once more with the hairdryer to make sure it's nice and dry before adding in my final detail. Just adding a few more light blue streaks into the pathway and a white circle for the moon in the light blue area of my background. When I paint a circle, I use my small detail brush and start smaller than I want it to be in the end, and then slowly adjust to the final size of the circle that I want, because circles are tough. The final part of this painting is adding in the fireflies. I will use my small detail brush and my finger. I make these by placing a small dot of light blue and then rubbing my finger over it in a small circular motion to create a soft little glow. And then I will use my detail brush to add a dot of white paint in the center. I keep the fireflies on top of the black painted areas so they really pop, but they can go really anywhere you like. Thanks so much for watching and following along. I hope you enjoyed it and you made a painting you can be proud of. If you would like to follow more painting tutorials from me or learn about lino cut printmaking and all sorts of other art techniques, please consider subscribing to my channel to see future videos. If you would like to purchase the original painting made in this video or check out my other work, you can follow the link in the description. Please also feel free to send me photos of your paintings to my Instagram account, which is also linked in the description of this video. Thanks again, and see you next time!